It's a brand new day in Marvel Snap and a brand new metagame. Let's take a look at what is succeeding in High Infinite after the OTA. And we're going to start with a deck that I've been playing a lot of recently that I think is pretty representative of the kind of stuff you can get away with in this metagame. And this is a very traditional Sera Surfer list, which basically has never been all that good. But since the patch, I've just been playing a lot of this deck because it seemed kind of fun. And it turns out that if you have enough energy cheat or enough of a good points engine and you just have a Shadow King in your deck and that's going to be able to win a lot of games, I was pretty surprised to realize just how straightforward it was to be able to do this. This feels like the easiest good deck that I've played in a very long time. If you're looking for something to just sleepwalk through the remainder of an infinite climb, this list does seem like the thing that can do it. I gained about 100 SP with it in High Infinite. The metagame feels very open, but generally just having one relevant tech card and a lot of good engine is a nice space to be. Actually, if I had to compare this deck to anything, I would almost compare it to a Doom 2099 deck, where most of what's happening is just we're doing a relatively large but not combo level amount of points, and then from there, cool things are just happening and we have minimal but still very relevant interaction. Being a Surfer deck that can play Shadow King is pretty sweet. There are also several cards in here that I would consider extremely flexible. Cards like Namorita, who can be Nocturne or really kind of whatever you want. Makkari was pretty okay, but not really locked in. I had some okay time with Viv Vision. She was decent, but not like, oh my god, you must have this. Storm is still a better card than her most of the time. But a lot of what this deck was doing was just, here's a bunch of energy cheat, here's a bunch of numbers that stack on each other, and it just kind of works. And I was honestly pretty impressed by how it was able to marry a proactive points game plan with at least one relevant metagame tech card, which made it feel a lot more like there were winnable matchups in the space that you were trying to get to. A lot of the stuff that's going to go over the top of you goes over the top of you via green power, so having the ability to stop them from doing that is pretty solid. And unlike other Shadow King decks, you're actually very good at throwing priority because thanks to all of your energy cheaters, you can kind of just dump all your cards in one lane. And so as long as they have a single card at the other two lanes, you're basically playing a card on 3 and then a Mother Askani on 4 and then a Sera on 5. You're not going to be winning many lanes with that, so you often get access to your Shadow King without it really hurting your game plan. And that's pretty cool too. From Splat, a list that is focused around various forms of putting cards in your deck that you then draw with a Jubilee buff. There's a couple of things going on here. The first is baseline, get the Thor hammers in the deck and then draw them off of Jane Foster Thor. If you have a Jubilee on the board, they will additionally get 3 power. The second thing going on here is that you are looking at trying to play a Daredevil, then a Phastos, which will discount, presumably, some of the demons you put in your deck to 1. It would be very unlucky if you weren't able to discount any of them to 1. And then allow those to be drawn off of Jane Foster as well. The premise here is to mix Jubilee and Jane Foster to accelerate the amount of output you get from Jubilee. This also is mixed with a Hit Monkey Black Swan game plan because you are so 1-cost heavy, and the Thor stuff naturally lends itself well to this space. This is a pure combo deck that is doing pure combo deck things, and I think you could argue that maybe the ceiling isn't high enough to justify it, but it is the most interesting thing I've seen someone do with Silver Surfer Jubilee since the OTA. Websling's change means that it is very likely to be the second best 1-cost move activator. That seems to be the space that it's flowing into right now. At 1/3, Ghost Spider, I think, still a little bit better in most cases. The floor is so much higher, and it's such an easy card to use that works on the turn you play it. But I do think that Iron Fist and Aranya may have been supplanted in lists that are looking to play around with the move aspect of Marvel Snap. This list comes from Ika. It is, I think, fairly unsurprisingly from Ika, a Scream deck. I don't know how many decks I've named Ika's Scream on this channel, but it has been a pretty solid amount. He is someone who will routinely go back to mid-rangey lists just to feel something again, and Scream/Clog is actually the kind of thing that can do well in a metagame like this that is extremely open, but still has enough things in it that care a lot about board positioning and don't necessarily have a ton of volume in terms of their output. This is a deck that has some notable weaknesses. You really don't love seeing things like Shadow King. You really don't love seeing things like Gambit, Horseman of Death being copied. And you really generally, I think, have a pretty awkward matchup against some of the things that are going to likely in the near future become popular again. I'm a little bit scared of trying to do Scream things when people are playing a bunch of V-Hand Gambit Sasquatch. But on the whole, the Clog sub-theme here is very nice. The web sling enables some additional points, and Cannonball Iska is actually just a great way to win 2 lanes, even if a bunch of your stuff is getting blown up. One thing that is a potentially good piece of advice for people trying to win in early open metagames is to play a deck that has a very proactive, straightforward game plan, play it aggressively, and snap it aggressively on the theory that your opponents won't necessarily be running the things they need to be running in order to interact with this. I'm not sure that necessarily holds up in this specific metagame, given the prevalence of Shadow King, but Cougar's Man Spider deck is a great example of a deck that is and should be built along these lines. This is a deck that is attempting to do something extremely specific and extremely game-winning when it happens. It has some natural counters, depending on priority, like Cosmo, Negasonic, and Juggernaut when you don't have priority, and Shadow King when you do. But you are able to play through a lot of that stuff. My big question is this going to be the best Magic deck? There hasn't been a lot of exploration in the Magic space recently. People have just been playing a bunch of Zombie Galacti. But I do think that this is a list that has some real potential to rise up and become one of the more powerful Magic decks in the game. Unfortunately, one of the big strengths of a deck like this, the straightforward, aggressive snapping nature of it, is also one of the big weaknesses. Because you're a Magic deck that also has these pronounced weaknesses to the 4 aforementioned interactive cards, a lot of the time when you lose big and you lose surprisingly. You have a very powerful game plan, but it's also very fragile. This is a deck that I think would be best described as a glass cannon. The many men deck is still a powerful list in Marvel Snap, and it's kind of something that I think has been flying under the radar for the general population for an extended period of time now. This is a deck that I think most people at High Infinite would tell you is one of the strongest and scariest lists to play against in the entire game, and from what I can tell, its population just simply does not increase very much, but the buff to Web Sling might thrust it a little bit more into the spotlight, because there's a very real chance that this is the best web sling deck in the entire game. Now, there is a sort of ongoing debate in this list as to how many enablers you need to play and how many payoffs you need to play, because you really only have a couple of cards that are going to win lanes. Your best things to do are to put things like Spider, the robot, of course, from Penny Parker, onto a multiple man and then move that multiple man a bunch of times. And being able to do that is a really cool, really awesome thing that you are definitely excited to get access to. I do think that Web Sling has some additional utility in a world where you're trying to do really cool multiple man things, but it can be a bit of a difficult card to use. And of course, you also have Human Torch and Iska, who are going to try to win lanes the other way by doubling themselves on their own lanes, whereas multiple man doubles across lanes. This is a deck that has a bunch of power in it, but fundamentally what it is a bunch of doublers, a Juggernaut, and a Cosmo. This is a super well-worn archetype. We all know what's going on here if you zoom out and think about it less as a move deck and more as a doublers Juggernaut Cosmo deck. We've seen that before, and I think that that is a really good profile for a deck like this to have. It's a dangerous deck, and frankly, of all the decks we've talked about, this is the one that I feel I'm the most sure is going to end up on the actual tier list. I know I said the other Jubilee Silver Surfer deck was the most interesting deck I've seen someone doing with something with Jubilee since the patch. However, Smiz has been working on this list since before the patch, and Jubilee did just get buffed. This is a list that is looking to combine its buffs in interesting, awkward, and weird ways to arrive at something that is greater than the sum of its parts. It's a stack of buff cards, all of which enable further buff cards. You can Psylocke out a Jubilee on turn 3, which is a very strong thing to do. You can Surge things out. Surge, because this deck has so many 4s, is an incredible card in this list because the 4s become 3s and they also get buffs, and most of your 4s tend to scale with buffs. A lot of really cool things going on. It is, I think, perhaps the best Jubilee Silver Surfer list that I've seen played, but I do think that one of the things that it's doing that is so notable is that I don't think it has the ability to carve itself out a real space in the metagame. This is definitely an early meta wonder where you should enjoy the time you have to be able to play something like this, because I do worry that it doesn't necessarily have the sturdiness and longevity to stand up to a more focused metagame. But in an unfocused metagame, this deck can really surprise people, and there is a lot of surprise value and snap equity in playing a deck that looks like it's a lot worse than it is. And I think that that is how I would describe this deck. When you're playing against it, you're like, this has to be bad. It's a Jubilee Silver Surfer deck. Come on, I don't have to respect that. But you do. And especially on the final turns of the game, there can be a lot of point output and a Juggernaut coming down. That's a very real threat. Speaking of point output and a Juggernaut, that's always gonna be decent here. Honestly, I really think that the big consequence of the techno-organic virus nerf was just that everyone remembered that they should be playing Juggernaut, and it wasn't very good in the techno-organic virus meta because that deck was filling up the board so much, and so people just didn't really have the ability to be points plus Juggernaut deck. But once the TOV tech deck with Mobius and old TOV got nerfed, suddenly everyone's a Juggernaut deck again because people just aren't filling the board the same way, and people aren't filling the board the same way. There's just a ton of value you can get out of just being the best Juggernaut deck possible. And this is a list from Derek that is attempting to be the best Juggernaut deck possible using a move package to create as many points as you can for as little investment as you can, and then relying on Iska, Cosmo, and Juggernaut for the rest of the game. Stop me if you've heard this before. It's very similar to the multiple man deck. However, instead of focusing on a combo-oriented game plan, this is a much more mid-rangey Iska, Cosmo, Juggernaut, Web Sling, Aranya, Ghost Spider, Madam Web deck. But it is very similar. Now, my preferred build of Phantom X is the teched out version of Phantom X, but I've talked about that a lot, so let's talk about the combo-oriented version of Phantom X. This list is built to take Phantom X to greater heights in terms of point output by sacrificing some of the interactive tools that, in my view, allow Phantom X to sort of scrape out a living as a consistently good deck. In other words, it's trading floor for ceiling. The output here is pretty massive, but you are going to have to be smarter about your retreats because you do not have the safety blankets of Mobius M. Mobius and Shadow King to keep you from getting overrun. The role of those cards in a deck like Phantom X is to allow Phantom X to do the heavy lifting in terms of points, while they prevent anything from being bigger than Phantom X. It's actually fairly similar in conception to a Supergiant deck, where the premise of the deck is that you have enough things that prevent your opponent's combos from working and going over the top of you, that your guys who are just really good stats, Phantom X is like 19 stats for 4, Wild Child is 2-9, that kind of stuff can take over a game just by being super efficient. And you try to make the game about being super efficient by playing cards like Mobius and Shadow King to stop things from going exponential all over your face. And this deck is saying, no, what if we are the exponential players? What if we are going to play 3 Phantom X triggers? What if we are doing Jocasta Phantom X Prodigy? What if that's us? What if that's the world we get to live in? And I think in an early open metagame, it's a very valid decision. You are super allowed to do it. Although I think long term, largely, I would prefer the other strategy or the other idea of a Phantom X deck build. Last up from Andrevar, if you want to ruin people's days, this is a very reasonable list to be playing. It is effectively a version of the V-hand list that is just really all in on making your opponents feel terrible about every choice they've made. I actually saw someone in main chord pushing top 10 with a list that I think was maybe one card off. This is a full tech, full gambit list, and it is designed to crush hopes. So if that is something that you are into, take a cue from Andrevar and that guy from main chord whose name I'm actually forgetting right now. Huge apologies to that guy, but congratulations on your high rank. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. And update on the aspect ratio thing. I redid all of my cameras in OBS. I also changed the angle of that thing. So if the aspect ratio is still off, I don't know what could possibly be doing it. I'm glad that many people pushed back and said, no, KM, your face isn't fat. Your aspect ratio is off. That made me feel great. I'm a big fan of that. But if it's still off, I think we're just going to have to accept that my face is fat, and that's just how we're going to have to live with it. So thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal, and I said that already.